My son took me to dinner at an expensive rooftop. I was moved. When he went to the bathroom, the security guard approached me and whispered, "Ma'am, I saw him put something in your drink." I switched the glasses, and we made a toast. 15 minutes later, "I'm glad to have you here." Follow my story until the end, and comment the city you're watching from so I can see how far my story has reached. I should have known something was wrong the moment Vaughn called me with that overly cheerful voice. At 63, I've learned to recognize when people want something from me, especially my own son. But when he suggested dinner at Skyline Terrace, one of the most expensive rooftop restaurants in the city, my maternal heart overruled my practical mind. "Mom, I've been thinking we don't spend enough quality time together," he said during that phone call 3 days ago. "Let me take you somewhere special. You deserve it." The words felt like honey, sweet and warm. After years of stilted conversations and obligatory holiday visits, I desperately wanted to believe that my 35-year-old son genuinely wanted to reconnect. Maybe he had finally matured. Maybe becoming a father himself would happen soon, and he was preparing by mending our relationship. I spent an hour getting ready that evening, choosing my navy blue dress, the one he complimented years ago. I even wore the pearl necklace his father gave me for our 20th anniversary. Looking in the mirror, I saw a woman trying perhaps too hard to please a son who had grown increasingly distant since his father's death 5 years ago. The restaurant sat on the 40th floor of a gleaming downtown tower, offering a panoramic view of the city lights twinkling like earthbound stars. The maitre d' led us to a corner table with floor-to-ceiling windows. Everything about the evening felt orchestrated for maximum impact. The white tablecloth, the flickering candles, the soft jazz playing in the background. "This place is beautiful, Vaughn," I said, settling into the plush velvet chair. "It must cost a fortune." He waved dismissively, that confident smile I remembered from his childhood spreading across his face. "Don't worry about it, Mom. I got a promotion at the marketing firm. I wanted to celebrate with the most important woman in my life." Those words made my chest tight with emotion. For years, I had felt like an afterthought in his busy life. His calls became shorter, his visits less frequent. I blamed myself, wondering if I had failed him somehow after his father died, if my grief had pushed him away when he needed me most. The waiter approached with the wine list, and Vaughn ordered a bottle of Chateauneuf du Pape without even glancing at the price. $250 for wine. I tried not to wince, but Vaughn noticed. "Mom, relax. I can afford this. You taught me the value of hard work, remember?" He was right about that. After my husband died suddenly of a heart attack, leaving behind more debt than assets, I had worked 2 jobs to keep our small house and pay for Vaughn's college tuition. Those were exhausting years. Cleaning offices at dawn, then rushing to my afternoon shift at the department store. I came home every night with aching feet and empty pockets, but I never let Vaughn see my struggles. The wine arrived, and Vaughn made a show of tasting it, nodding approvingly at the sommelier. He poured generous glasses for both of us, the dark liquid catching the candlelight like liquid rubies. "To new beginnings," he said, raising his glass. "To family," I replied, my voice catching slightly. We talked about safe topics, his work, the weather, a funny story about his neighbor's dog, but I sensed an undercurrent of nervousness in his manner. He kept checking his watch and glancing around the restaurant as if waiting for something. When our appetizers arrived, he barely touched his seared scallops. "Are you feeling all right?" I asked, noticing the fine sheen of perspiration on his forehead despite the restaurant's air conditioning. "Just excited," he said quickly. "I have some news to share with you later." My heart lifted. Maybe he was going to tell me about a girlfriend, or perhaps he had decided to buy a house and wanted my advice. The possibilities swirled in my mind like the wine in my glass. Halfway through our main courses, Vaughn excused himself. "I'll be right back, Mom. Don't let them take my plate." I watched him walk toward the restrooms, noting how he moved with purpose rather than casual need. Something felt off, but I couldn't pinpoint what exactly. The conversation had flowed well enough, and he seemed genuinely interested in my stories about the neighbor's new garden and my book club's latest selection. I was admiring the city skyline when a shadow fell across our table. I looked up to see a security guard, a middle-aged man with kind eyes and graying temples. He wore the restaurant's standard black suit with a small brass nameplate that read, Marcus. "Excuse me, ma'am," he said in a low voice, glancing quickly toward the restroom area. "I don't mean to alarm you, but I need to tell you something important." My heart rate quickened. "Is everything all right?" Marcus looked uncomfortable, as if he were wrestling with whether to speak at all. "I saw your son put something in your drink while you were looking out the window. I'm trained to watch for these things, and I couldn't live with myself if I didn't warn you." The words hit me like ice water. I stared at him, my mind struggling to process what he had said. "I'm sorry." "What?" "Your wine glass, ma'am." When you turned to look at the view, he dropped something into it. A small white tablet. It dissolved quickly. I felt the blood drain from my face. My hand instinctively moved away from my wine glass as if it had become a serpent. "Are you certain?" Marcus nodded gravely. "I've been doing this job for 15 years. I know what I saw. You should consider switching your glass with his when he returns." The suggestion was so surreal that I almost laughed. Switch glasses with my own son? The idea seemed like something from a movie, not my real life. But as I looked at Marcus's serious expression, reality began to settle in my stomach like a stone. Why would he? I started to ask, then stopped. I knew why. Last week I had been writing in my study when Vaughn dropped by unexpectedly. He said he wanted to borrow my car, but I found him lingering near my desk where my legal papers were spread out. I had been updating my will, something I had been putting off since my husband's death. "Thank you," I whispered to Marcus. "Thank you for telling me." He squeezed my shoulder gently. "Be careful, ma'am, and if you need help, just signal me." I watched him walk away, my hands trembling as I reached for my purse. Inside, I found my phone and quickly texted my sister, "Call me in 10 minutes. Emergency." If something was about to happen, I wanted someone to know where I was. When Vaughn returned to the table, his demeanor had changed. Gone was the nervous energy. Now he seemed almost relaxed, expectant. He slid into his chair with a satisfied smile. "Sorry about that, Mom. Where were we?" "You were about to tell me your news," I said, my voice surprisingly steady despite the chaos in my mind. "Right." He picked up his wine glass and gestured for me to do the same. But first, another toast. To the future. I lifted what had been his glass, now containing the wine he had intended for me. The weight of it felt enormous in my hand, as if I were holding something far more significant than burgundy crystal and poisoned wine. "To the future," I echoed, watching his face carefully. We drank simultaneously. I took only a small sip, but Vaughn drained nearly half his glass in one gulp. Within minutes, I noticed the change. His eyelids grew heavy, and his words began to slur slightly. "Mom," he said, blinking slowly, "I think I'm not feeling so good. Maybe we should get you home," I suggested. My heart pounding so hard I was sure he could hear it. But as I watched my son struggle against the sedative he had meant for me, I realized with devastating clarity that I had been naive for far too long. This wasn't a son celebrating a promotion with his mother. This was something else entirely. Something that would change everything between us forever. The golden trap had been set, but I was no longer the intended prey. Getting Vaughn home proved more challenging than I had anticipated. He kept insisting he felt fine while simultaneously struggling to maintain his balance. The valet brought my car around while I supported my son's weight, his arm heavy across my shoulders. To anyone watching, we probably looked like a typical family dealing with someone who had simply had too much wine. "Mom, I don't understand what's happening," he mumbled as I helped him into the passenger seat. I only had 2 glasses of wine that should have rendered me unconscious instead of him. The irony wasn't lost on me, but the fear was very real. What exactly had he put in that drink? And more importantly, what had he planned to do once I was incapacitated? The 30-minute drive to his apartment felt eternal. Vaughn drifted in and out of consciousness, his head lolling against the window. During his more lucid moments, he spoke in fragments that chilled me to the bone. "The papers," he muttered at one point, his eyes closed. "Need to get to the papers before she changes her mind." My hands tightened on the steering wheel. What papers was he referring to? My will? The documents I had been reviewing just last week? When she's sleeping, he continued, his voice barely audible. It'll be easy. Just a few signatures. She'll never know. I felt sick to my stomach. My own son, the child I had sacrificed everything for, had planned to drug me and forge my signature on legal documents. The magnitude of his betrayal hit me in waves, each realization more devastating than the last. By the time we reached his building, Vaughn was completely unconscious. I managed to wake him enough to walk, supporting most of his weight as we made our way to the elevator. His neighbor, Mrs. Chen, was getting her mail and looked concerned. "Is everything all right, dear?" she asked, her kind eyes studying Vaughn's condition. "Just a bit too much wine at dinner," I replied, forcing a smile. "You know how these fancy restaurants can be." She nodded sympathetically and held the elevator door for us. During the ride to the 8th floor, Vaughn's head dropped onto my shoulder, and I could smell the expensive wine on his breath mixed with something else, fear, perhaps, or guilt. His apartment was a mess. Dishes piled in the sink, clothes scattered across the furniture, and papers everywhere. This wasn't the organized, successful marketing executive I thought he had become. This looked like someone struggling to keep his life together. I managed to get him to his bedroom, where he collapsed onto the unmade bed fully clothed. Within seconds, he was snoring softly, completely vulnerable. I stood there looking down at him, this man who had once been my beautiful baby boy, and felt my heart breaking in ways I didn't know were possible, but heartbreak would have to wait. If I was going to understand what had happened tonight, I needed answers. I started with his computer, which sat open on the kitchen table amid a pile of bills and junk mail. The screen was already unlocked, displaying his email inbox. I felt guilty invading his privacy, but the events of the evening had shattered any normal boundaries between us. What I found made my blood run cold. In his search history, how long does Ambien take to work? Mixing sleep medication with alcohol effects. Legal consequences of document forgery. How to change inheritance documents. I sank into his desk chair, my legs suddenly unable to support me. He had researched this. This wasn't some impulsive decision born of desperation. It was premeditated. He had planned to drug me, and from his search history, it was clear he understood the risks involved. I scrolled further through his browser history and found something even more disturbing. Multiple visits to legal advice forums where he asked hypothetical questions about inheritance law under fake usernames. What happens if someone dies shortly after changing their will? Can family members contest a will if they suspect forgery? How to prove someone was mentally incompetent when they signed legal documents? My hands shook as I continued reading. In his email drafts, I found messages he had never sent but had clearly considered sending. One was addressed to a lawyer in another state. My elderly mother has been showing signs of confusion lately. I'm concerned about her ability to make sound financial decisions. What are my options for protecting her assets? Another draft was to a different attorney. My mother recently updated her will in ways that seem completely out of character for her. Is there a way to challenge this if she passes away? I realized with growing horror that Vaughn had been building a case against me, creating a paper trail that would support his narrative of an incompetent old woman making poor decisions. The updated will he referenced was real. I had indeed been making changes, but they were thoughtful decisions about charitable giving and ensuring my modest savings would make a difference in the world after I was gone. But to Vaughn, those changes apparently represented money being stolen from what he considered his rightful inheritance. I moved to his filing cabinet, which was unlocked. Inside, I found copies of my old will from 5 years ago, the one that left everything to him. He had somehow obtained these documents, probably during one of his visits to my house when I thought he was just being a caring son. More disturbing still was a folder labeled Financial Planning. Inside were calculations in Vaughn's handwriting, estimating the value of my house, my retirement accounts, my life insurance policy. He had even researched property values in my neighborhood and made notes about which real estate agent might get the best price for a quick sale. At the bottom of the folder was a printed email exchange between Vaughn and someone named Crystal. The messages were from 3 weeks ago. "Baby, I promise this will all be over soon. Once the old lady is out of the picture, we can finally start our real life together. Maybe buy that house in Sedona you've been dreaming about." Crystal's response: "I just want to make sure you're not doing anything dangerous, V. Maybe there's another way." Vaughn's reply: "Don't worry, it's foolproof. She trusts me completely. A few pills in her wine, and while she's sleeping, I'll take care of the paperwork. She's been talking about changing her will anyway. I'm just going to help her make the right decisions." I had to read the exchange 3 times before it fully registered. My son had discussed drugging me with his girlfriend as casually as they might plan a weekend getaway. He had reduced me to an obstacle to be removed, a problem to be solved. But what chilled me most was the phrase, "once the old lady is out of the picture." Did he mean permanently? Had tonight's sedative been intended as more than just a way to access my documents? I thought about the wine, the expensive restaurant, the careful planning. If he had given me a higher dose, or if I had an adverse reaction to whatever drug he used, I could have died. At 63, with a heart condition I kept private even from him, the combination of alcohol and sleeping medication could have been lethal. Had my son planned to kill me? The thought was so monstrous that I couldn't fully accept it. Maybe he had just intended to make me drowsy enough to sign papers without reading them carefully. Maybe the out-of-the-picture comment referred to removing me from financial decisions, not from life itself. But as I sat in his cluttered apartment, surrounded by evidence of his elaborate deception, I realized that the Vaughn I thought I knew, the son I had loved and sacrificed for, might never have existed at all. From the bedroom came the sound of his continued snoring, peaceful and innocent. I looked toward the doorway, imagining him lying there without a care in the world, probably dreaming of the money he thought should rightfully be his. Tomorrow, he would wake up confused and possibly hungover, wondering what had gone wrong with his carefully laid plans. And I would have to decide what to do with the knowledge that my own child had tried to drug me. But tonight, while he slept off the sedative meant for me, I had work to do. If Vaughn wanted to play games with my future, then it was time he learned that his 63-year-old mother still had a few surprises of her own. I spent the rest of that night in Vaughn's apartment, methodically going through every drawer, every file, every corner of his life that I could access without waking him. What I discovered painted a picture so different from the successful son I thought I knew that I began to wonder if I had been living in complete denial for years. The kitchen table was covered with unpaid bills, credit card statements showing balances of $12,000, $18,000, even $23,000 on a single card. The minimum payments alone would have consumed most of a reasonable salary. Late notices from his landlord indicated he was 3 months behind on rent, owing $4,800. His car payment was 2 months overdue, but the most damning evidence came from his laptop, which I found still logged into his personal accounts. His checking account showed a balance of negative $237. His savings account was empty. Every credit line was maxed out. Vaughn wasn't celebrating a promotion, he was drowning in debt. I found rejected loan applications dating back 6 months, personal loans, debt consolidation loans, even a desperate application for a payday advance that had been denied due to his credit score. In his email, I discovered increasingly frantic messages to creditors asking for payment extensions. One email to his credit card company read, "I'm expecting a large inheritance very soon. Can you please extend my payment deadline by 30 days? I will be able to pay the full balance at that time." The inheritance he was expecting was mine, my death. I felt physically ill as the full scope of his financial desperation became clear. This wasn't just about wanting nice things or feeling entitled to my money. Vaughn was in real trouble, the kind that could ruin his life if he couldn't find a solution quickly. But what disturbed me even more was evidence of how long he had been planning this. In a folder marked Personal Documents, I found printouts of my mortgage information, my bank statements, and detailed notes about my daily routines. He knew what time I went to bed, when I did my grocery shopping, even which days I attended my book club meetings. The level of surveillance was chilling. One document was titled Mom's Schedule and contained entries like Tuesday mornings, grocery store, usually returns by 10:30, Wednesday evenings, book club until 9, always exhausted afterward, Friday afternoons, nap from 2 to 4. He had been studying me like a subject, learning my patterns and vulnerabilities. The son who rarely called had somehow gathered intimate details about my daily life. How? Had he been watching my house? Installing cameras? The thought made my skin crawl. In his browser bookmarks, I found links to articles about elder abuse, specifically financial exploitation. But rather than reading these as someone concerned about protecting elderly relatives, his search history suggested he was learning techniques. How to identify elderly people who live alone, signs that an elderly person is isolated from family and friends, building trust with elderly relatives for financial access. I had to stop reading several times, overwhelmed by nausea. This was my son, the baby I had held in my arms and sung to sleep. The toddler who used to bring me dandelions he thought were beautiful flowers. The teenager who had hugged me and promised to take care of me when I was old. But perhaps the most devastating discovery was a series of text messages between Vaughn and his girlfriend Crystal from just 2 days ago. Their conversation revealed the true depth of his deception. Crystal, are you sure about tomorrow night? What if something goes wrong? Vaughn, nothing will go wrong. I've been planning this for months. She completely trusts me. Crystal, but what if the pills don't work the way you expect? Vaughn, then we move to plan B. Either way, by the end of the week, I'll have access to everything. The house alone is worth $300,000. Her retirement accounts have at least $150,000, plus the life insurance. Crystal. Life insurance? Vaughn. $200,000. She took out the policy after Dad died, probably thinking she was being responsible. She has no idea I'm the beneficiary. Crystal. This feels wrong, V. She's your mother, Vaughn. She's been selfish my whole life, working all the time when I was a kid, never being there for anything important. Now she wants to give my inheritance to charity? I don't think so. I've earned this money through years of putting up with her guilt trips and demands. I had to read that exchange several times before the words fully registered. Vaughn viewed my love and sacrifice as manipulation. My working 2 jobs to pay for his education was never being there. My recent decision to include charitable giving in my will was stealing his inheritance. But more terrifying was his mention of Plan B and his detailed knowledge of my life insurance policy. I remembered signing those papers 7 years ago, naming him as beneficiary because he was my only child. It had seemed like the natural thing to do. Now I realized I had essentially put a price on my own head. The life insurance payout would be enough to solve all of his financial problems at once. $200,000 plus the sale of my house and liquidation of my retirement savings would give him nearly $600,000 total, enough to pay off all his debts and still have a substantial sum left over. I found myself wondering again if tonight's sedative had been intended as more than just a way to forge documents. How much Ambien had he planned to give me? What would have happened if I had consumed the entire glass of wine? I moved to his bedroom doorway and watched him sleeping. In the dim light from the hallway, he looked peaceful, almost innocent, but I could no longer see my son when I looked at him. Instead, I saw a stranger who had been systematically planning my destruction while pretending to love me. My phone buzzed with a text from my sister Janet. Got your emergency message. Are you okay? Should I call the police? I had forgotten about my earlier text asking her to call me. I typed back quickly, everything's fine. False alarm. We'll call you tomorrow. But everything wasn't fine. Everything was about as far from fine as it could possibly get. I spent another hour documenting everything I had found, taking photos with my phone of the most incriminating evidence. If this situation escalated, I would need proof of Vaughn's plans and his financial desperation. As dawn began to brighten the windows, I realized I had a choice to make. I could confront Vaughn directly and hope that shame or fear might motivate him to change his behavior. I could involve the police and have him arrested for attempted drugging and conspiracy to commit fraud. Or I could say nothing and pretend this night had never happened, going back to my normal life while knowing my son was planning to harm me. None of these options felt satisfactory. A direct confrontation would likely just make him more careful in his next attempt. Involving law enforcement would destroy what remained of our relationship and possibly send him to prison. But pretending ignorance felt like signing my own death warrant. There was a fourth option, though, one that had been forming in my mind as I uncovered each piece of evidence against him. If Vaughn wanted to play games with my life and my legacy, then perhaps it was time I learned to play games too. But first, I needed to get out of his apartment before he woke up. I gathered my purse and coat, careful not to make any noise that might disturb his drug-induced sleep. At the door, I paused for one last look at the place where my son lived his desperate, deceptive life. Tomorrow, he would wake up confused and probably panicked, wondering what had gone wrong with his carefully planned evening. He would call me, pretending to be concerned about my health, fishing for information about what I remembered from dinner. And I would be ready for him. As I drove home through the early morning streets, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years, a sense of my own power. For too long, I had been the grieving widow, the struggling single mother, the aging woman worried about being a burden. But tonight had reminded me that I was still capable of clear thinking and decisive action. Vaughn had underestimated me, and that might be the biggest mistake of his life. Vaughn called me at 11:30 the next morning, just as I was finishing my second cup of coffee and reviewing the photos I had taken of his incriminating documents. His voice sounded rough, probably from the combination of alcohol and whatever sedative he had intended for me. "Mom, how are you feeling today?" The concern in his voice was so perfectly crafted that if I hadn't seen the evidence of his planning, I might have believed it was genuine. "I'm fine, sweetheart. A little tired, maybe. That wine was stronger than I expected." "Yeah, about that." He paused, and I could almost hear him trying to figure out what had gone wrong. "I don't remember much after we left the restaurant. Did I say anything strange?" So he did remember fragments, enough to worry about what he might have revealed during his sedated state. "You were pretty quiet on the drive home. I think you fell asleep in the car." "Right, and you got me home okay?" "Of course. I made sure you were safe in your apartment before I left." I kept my voice light, motherly. Let him think I had simply dropped him off and gone home, none the wiser about his true intentions. I feel terrible that our nice evening ended that way. I wanted to tell you my news, but I guess it'll have to wait. His news. The promotion that didn't exist meant to justify the expensive dinner that was supposed to be my last meal as a free woman. We can always do it another time. Actually, I was thinking I could come over this afternoon. I'm feeling much better now, and I really want to share what's been happening in my life. My grip tightened on the phone. He wanted to come here, to my house where my legal documents were kept, where a confused elderly woman might be persuaded to make some financial decisions she wouldn't remember clearly later. "That sounds lovely," I said. "Come around 4. I'll make your favorite cookies." After hanging up, I spent the next several hours preparing for what might be the most important conversation of my life. I needed to be strategic, to give Vaughn enough rope to hang himself while protecting myself from any immediate danger. I moved all my important documents from my home office to my bedroom, locking them in the small safe my husband had installed years ago. Then I set up my phone to record, hiding it among some magazines on the coffee table where it wouldn't be noticed but would pick up our conversation clearly. At exactly 4 o'clock, Vaughn arrived looking remarkably well for someone who had been unconscious 12 hours earlier. He carried a small bouquet of grocery store flowers and wore his most charming smile. "For my favorite lady," he said, kissing my cheek as he handed me the flowers. "How thoughtful. Come in, the cookies are almost ready." I watched him carefully as we settled in the living room. His eyes moved around the space, and I noticed him glancing toward my office. "So, tell me about this promotion," I said, pouring tea from the service I had prepared. "Well, it's more than just a promotion. It's a whole new opportunity." He leaned forward, his enthusiasm seeming genuine. "I've been offered a partnership in a new marketing venture. It's exactly the kind of break I've been waiting for." "That's wonderful!" What kind of investment are they looking for? His smile faltered slightly. It's substantial, around $50,000, but the returns could be incredible, Mom. We're talking about the kind of money that could set me up for life. $50,000, more than enough to clear his debts and fund this mythical business opportunity. I sipped my tea, considering my response. That is a significant amount. I know it's a lot, but I was hoping. He paused, running his hand through his hair in a gesture I remembered from his childhood when he was nervous. I was hoping you might consider it as an early inheritance. You know, an investment in my future. There it was. The direct ask he probably would have made after I was incapacitated and vulnerable. An early inheritance? I know it's presumptuous, but I've been thinking about our conversation last week when you mentioned updating your will. You said you were considering leaving money to charity, and while I think that's admirable, I wondered if you might want to see your generosity make a difference in your lifetime. He was good. I had to give him credit. The way he framed it made his request sound almost noble, as if he was offering me the chance to see my money do good, rather than simply asking for a handout. I appreciate your thoughtfulness, I said carefully, but $50,000 would represent a significant portion of my savings. I understand, but Mom, this opportunity won't wait. The partnership offer expires next week. His voice took on a note of urgency that I recognized from childhood tantrums. I've never asked you for anything major since college. That wasn't true, and we both knew it. Over the past 5 years, there had been numerous emergencies that required my financial assistance. The car repair that cost $3,000, the medical bill that insurance didn't cover, another $2,500, the security deposit for his current apartment when he moved suddenly from his previous place. I had helped every time, believing his stories and wanting to support my son as he established his adult life. Now I realized those emergencies had probably been lies, ways to slowly drain my savings while testing how much I was willing to give. Vaughn, I said gently, I need to ask you something, and I want you to be completely honest with me. He tensed slightly, perhaps sensing a shift in the conversation's tone. Of course, Mom. What is it? Are you in some kind of financial trouble? The question hung in the air between us like a challenge. I watched his face carefully, noting the micro-expressions that crossed his features: surprise, calculation, and finally, a practiced mask of hurt confusion. Financial trouble? Why would you ask that? Because $50,000 is a lot of money to need immediately for a business opportunity. And because last night, when you were feeling unwell, you said some things that concerned me. His face went pale. What kind of things? You mentioned papers and signatures and seemed worried about running out of time for something. I kept my voice gentle, concerned rather than accusatory. I'm wondering if this business opportunity is really about paying off debts rather than investing in your future. For a long moment, he said nothing. I could see him weighing his options, trying to decide whether to continue the deception or shift to a different strategy. Okay, he said finally, his shoulders slumping in apparent defeat. You're right. I am in some financial difficulty, but it's not what you think. Tell me what it is then. I made some investment mistakes last year, put money into what I thought was a sure thing, and it didn't work out. I'm behind on some payments, but this partnership opportunity is real, Mom. It's my chance to get back on track. Another lie, smoother this time, but still a lie. I had seen his credit card statements, his rejected loan applications. This wasn't about one bad investment. It was about years of living beyond his means. How much debt are you carrying? I asked directly. He hesitated, clearly calculating how much truth he could afford to reveal. Maybe $40,000. It sounds like a lot, but with the right opportunity, I can turn it around quickly. $40,000, less than half of what I had discovered in his apartment. Either he was still lying, or he didn't want me to know the full extent of his financial crisis. And if you don't get this partnership opportunity? Something darker crossed his face then. A flash of the desperation I had seen evidence of in his private papers. I'll figure something out, I always do. But his voice lacked conviction, and I realized with crystal clarity that this conversation was my son's last attempt at a legitimate solution to his problems. If I refused to give him the money, He would return to his original plan, drugging me and taking what he needed through forgery and deception. Or worse. I need some time to think about this, I said finally. $50,000 is a major decision. How much time? The urgency in his voice was unmistakable now. A few days, maybe a week. Mom, I don't have a week. This opportunity expires on Friday. Then perhaps it's not the right opportunity for you. I watched as his carefully constructed facade began to crack. His jaw tightened, and his hands clenched into fists before he forced them to relax. For just a moment, I saw the man who had researched ways to drug elderly people and planned to forge my signature on legal documents. You don't understand, he said, his voice harder now. I need this money. And frankly, Mom, I've earned it. Do you have any idea what it was like growing up with a mother who was never around? Who worked constantly and never had time for the things that mattered? There it was, the resentment that had been festering for years, the justification he used to rationalize his plans to steal from me. In his mind, my sacrifices to support him were actually failures that entitled him to compensation. I'm sorry you felt neglected, I said quietly. I was doing the best I could under difficult circumstances. Your best wasn't good enough. And now, when you finally have the chance to make up for those years, you're going to give my inheritance to strangers instead of your own son. The mask was completely off now. This was the real Vaughn, the man who saw my money as his birthright and my charitable intentions as theft. But I wasn't the helpless victim he thought I was. Not anymore. The conversation with Vaughn ended badly, as I had expected it would. When I maintained my position about needing time to consider his request, his anger became more apparent. He left my house that afternoon with barely concealed frustration, making one last attempt at emotional manipulation. I hope you'll remember that I'm your only family, he said at the door, his voice carrying an undertone of threat. When you're older and need someone to take care of you, charity organizations won't be there, but I will be. The implied message was clear. Give me the money now, or face abandonment in my old age. What he didn't realize was that after last night's discovery, abandonment felt like a gift rather than a punishment. I spent the weekend making phone calls and appointments. First, I contacted my attorney, Margaret Walsh, and scheduled an emergency meeting for Monday morning. Then I called my financial advisor, Dr. Harrison, and arranged to review all my accounts and beneficiary designations. Finally, I reached out to my sister Janet and asked if she could visit later in the week. I didn't involve the police, though I seriously considered it. Vaughn had committed attempted assault by drugging my drink, and I had evidence of his plans to commit fraud. But sending my son to prison felt like a nuclear option that would destroy any possibility of redemption for him. And despite everything, some part of me still hoped he might change. Instead, I decided to teach him a lesson about consequences in a way he would understand, through his wallet. Monday morning, I sat in Margaret's office with copies of all the evidence I had gathered, including photos of Vaughn's debt records and screenshots of his text messages about drugging me. Margaret, a sharp woman in her 50s who had handled my legal affairs since my husband's death, listened with growing concern. Sherry, this is criminal behavior, she said after reviewing everything. You could have died from that combination of alcohol and sedatives, especially with your heart condition. I know, but I want to handle this privately, at least initially. What are my options for protecting myself financially? Margaret pulled out a legal pad and began making notes. We can completely restructure your estate plan, remove him as beneficiary from your life insurance policy, create a revocable trust for your assets, and establish strict conditions for any inheritance he might receive. What kind of conditions? Employment verification, regular drug testing, financial counseling, community service. We can require him to demonstrate responsibility for a specified period before receiving any benefits. If he violates the terms, he gets nothing. I liked the sound of that. How quickly can we implement these changes? I can have new documents prepared by Thursday, but Sherry, I also think you should consider filing a police report. What if he tries again? If he tries again, I'll call the police immediately. But I want to give him one chance to understand that his actions have consequences without destroying his life completely. Margaret nodded, though I could see she had reservations. We'll also set up a safety net. I'll prepare a sealed letter detailing everything you've discovered, to be opened in the event of your sudden death or incapacitation. And I'll require Vaughn to meet with me quarterly to review his compliance with the trust conditions. The changes we made were comprehensive. My life insurance policy was switched to benefit a charity organization that supported elderly victims of financial abuse. My house and retirement accounts were placed in a trust that would provide Vaughn with a modest monthly stipend, $500, contingent on his maintaining steady employment and staying out of legal trouble. Any hope of a large lump sum inheritance was eliminated. If Vaughn wanted access to the principal of the trust, he would need to demonstrate financial responsibility for 5 consecutive years, including paying off all his debts and maintaining stable housing and employment. The most important change was the addition of a clause stating that any attempt to harm, defraud, or take advantage of me would result in immediate forfeiture of all benefits. Margaret worded it carefully to ensure it would hold up in court. "This is generous," Margaret observed as we finalized the documents. "Many people would cut him off entirely after what he tried to do. I want him to have the opportunity to become the man I raised him to be," I replied, "but only if he earns it." On Thursday, I met with Dr. Harrison to update all my financial accounts. We removed Vaughn's name from everything, established new passwords and security questions, and set up alerts for any unusual activity. Dr. Harrison also helped me move most of my liquid assets into accounts that would be harder for anyone to access without proper authorization. "You're being very wise," Dr. Harrison said as we completed the paperwork. "Elder financial abuse is unfortunately common, and family members are often the perpetrators. I never imagined I'd need to protect myself from my own son. It's heartbreaking, but you're taking the right steps. These safeguards will protect you while still allowing you to maintain control of your own finances." The hardest part was waiting for Vaughn to contact me again. I knew he would. His deadline for the supposed business opportunity was approaching, and his desperation would drive him to try again. The call came Friday evening, just as I was finishing dinner. "Mom, I've been thinking about our conversation," he said, his voice carefully modulated to sound reasonable. "I know I got emotional, and I apologize for that. I'm just under a lot of pressure right now." "I understand, sweetheart. Have you had a chance to consider my request? The partnership deadline is tomorrow morning." I had anticipated this moment and prepared my response carefully. "I've given it a lot of thought, and I've decided I can't provide the $50,000 you need." Silence stretched across the phone line. When he spoke again, his voice was tight with controlled anger. "Can't or won't, both. Vaughn, I'm concerned about your judgment right now. I think you need to find other solutions to your financial problems." "Other solutions?" His laugh was bitter. "Mom, you have over $400,000 in assets. $50,000 is nothing to you, but it's everything to me. $400,000. He had done his research thoroughly, calculating the value of my house, retirement accounts, and savings. But what he didn't know was that as of Thursday afternoon, most of those assets were no longer accessible to him. "I've made my decision," I said firmly. "I hope you can find another way to handle your situation. What if I can't? What if this ruins my life?" The question contained an implicit threat. What would he do if his legitimate attempts to get money failed? Would he return to his original plan of drugging me and forging documents? "Then you'll have to live with the consequences of your choices," I replied, "just like everyone else." After I hung up, I double-checked all my security measures. Doors locked, windows secured, phone within reach. I also sent a text to my sister Janet. "Call me tomorrow morning by 9. If you don't hear from me, contact the police." I didn't sleep well that night, jumping at every small sound and wondering if Vaughn might try something desperate. But Saturday morning arrived without incident, and Janet's call at 8:30 reassured me that I was safe. Over the following weeks, Vaughn tried various approaches to change my mind. He called less frequently but sent long, emotional emails detailing his financial struggles and promising to change if I would just help him this one time. He showed up at my house twice, both times appearing disheveled and desperate, begging me to reconsider. I maintained my position while carefully documenting each contact. Margaret had advised me to keep records of his behavior in case we needed to pursue a restraining order. The breakthrough came 6 weeks after our confrontation, when Vaughn called me crying. "Mom, I lost my apartment. I'm staying at a friend's place, but I can't keep doing this. I'm drowning." For the first time since discovering his plans, I heard genuine remorse in his voice rather than manipulation. "What do you want from me, Vaughn?" "I want help, but not money, I think. I think I need to talk to someone, a counselor or therapist. I don't know how I got to this point, but I know something is wrong with the way I've been thinking." This was the moment I had been hoping for. Recognition that his problems went deeper than debt and required more than money to solve. "I think that's a very mature decision," I said carefully. "I'll pay for counseling sessions if you're serious about getting help." "Really? Even after everything? Vaughn, I love you. I always have. But love doesn't mean enabling destructive behavior." He was quiet for a long moment. "I said some terrible things to you, about how you raised me, about the money. I was angry and scared. But that's no excuse. No, it's not. But it's a start to acknowledge that." We talked for another hour, the longest honest conversation we had shared in years. Vaughn admitted to lying about the business opportunity and revealed the true extent of his debt: $73,000 spread across multiple credit cards and personal loans. He also confessed something that chilled me. That night at the restaurant, I was so desperate I wasn't thinking clearly. "I could have seriously hurt you with that pill, couldn't I?" "Yes," I said simply. "You could have." "I'm sorry, Mom. I'm so sorry for all of it." It was a beginning, though I knew sorry wouldn't be enough. Trust, once broken so completely, would take years to rebuild, if it could be rebuilt at all. But for the first time since that terrible night at the restaurant, I felt hopeful that my son might still be salvageable. 2 years have passed since that night at the rooftop restaurant, and as I sit in my new apartment overlooking the harbor, I barely recognize the fearful woman I used to be. The view from my living room window shows sailboats dancing on the water, their white sails catching the morning sun like promises of adventure. The apartment is smaller than my old house, but it's mine in a way that place never was. Every piece of furniture was chosen because I loved it, not because it matched some idea of what a proper home should look like. The walls are painted in colors that make me happy: soft yellow in the kitchen, sage green in the bedroom, and a bold coral in the living room that my old self would have considered too daring. Vaughn and I talk once a month now, usually on the first Sunday. Our conversations are careful but genuine, built on the foundation of honesty we established after his breakdown 2 years ago. He's been attending therapy sessions regularly, has a modest apartment in a different part of town, and works as a customer service representative for an insurance company. It's not glamorous work, but it's steady, and he's slowly paying down his debts. The trust I established provides him with his monthly stipend of $500, enough to supplement his income, but not enough to make him comfortable. Every month, he has to submit documentation proving his continued employment and responsible behavior. Every quarter, he meets with Margaret to review his progress. He's paid off $12,000 of his debt so far. At his current rate, it will take him another 4 years to be completely free of his financial obligations. Only then will he be eligible to receive larger distributions from the trust, and only if he maintains his stability. "It's hard sometimes," he told me during our last conversation. "Seeing friends go out to expensive restaurants or take vacations while I'm counting every dollar. But I earned this situation, and I have to work my way out of it." The humility in his voice was real. The entitled, desperate man who had tried to drug me seemed like a different person entirely, though I knew recovery wasn't linear. Trust would always be conditional between us, built on actions rather than words. "I'm proud of you for sticking with it," I had replied, and meant it. "Change is harder than people think. Do you think you'll ever forgive me completely?" he asked, a question he posed during every call. "I don't know," I answered honestly, "but I'm grateful that you're becoming someone worth forgiving." The changes in my own life have been just as dramatic. Selling the house had been emotional but necessary. Too many memories lived in those rooms, and I needed space to discover who I was beyond being a widow and a disappointed mother. The sale netted me enough money to buy this apartment outright and still have a substantial cushion for the future. I volunteer now at the Elder Financial Protection Center, helping other seniors recognize and avoid the kind of exploitation I almost fell victim to. It's sobering work, hearing stories of children who drained their parents' retirement accounts, grandchildren who forged signatures on deeds, and romantic partners who disappeared with life savings. "You were lucky," Sandra, the center's director, told me after I shared my story with a support group. "You caught it before it went too far, and you had the resources to protect yourself. Not everyone is so fortunate." She was right. My financial security and the quick action I took had saved me from the devastating losses that many others suffered. Some of the people in our support group had lost everything to manipulative family members, left with nothing but broken trust and empty bank accounts. But I've learned that luck had less to do with my outcome than determination. I could have chosen to ignore the warning signs, to rationalize Vaughn's behavior, to enable his desperation out of misplaced maternal guilt. Instead, I chose to protect myself, even when it meant confronting the painful truth about my son's character. The work at the center has introduced me to a community I never knew existed. Other survivors of financial abuse who understand the unique pain of being betrayed by someone you love. We've formed genuine friendships based on shared experience and mutual support. There's Martha, whose grandson stole her identity and opened credit cards in her name. Robert, whose daughter convinced him to sign over his house and then immediately put him in a nursing home. And Patricia, whose new husband disappeared with her savings after a whirlwind 6-month marriage. We meet monthly for dinner at a small restaurant downtown, sharing updates on our legal battles, our family relationships, and our efforts to rebuild our lives. These people understand something that others can't: the way financial abuse leaves you questioning not just your judgment about money, but your judgment about people, about love, about your own worth. "The hardest part isn't the money," Martha said during our last gathering. "It's learning to trust yourself again, learning to believe that you're worth protecting." I've also reconnected with old friends I had lost touch with during the years I spent focused on Vaughn's problems. My book club welcomed me back with enthusiasm, and I've started playing bridge again on Thursday afternoons. Simple pleasures that had felt frivolous when I was constantly worried about my son's latest crisis. My sister Janet visits monthly, usually staying for a long weekend. She brings news of her grandchildren and updates about relatives I rarely see. But more importantly, she brings laughter and companionship. We take long walks along the harbor, cook elaborate meals together, and stay up too late talking about everything and nothing. "You seem happier," she observed during her last visit. "More like yourself." "I feel like myself," I replied. "For the first time in years, it's true." The constant anxiety about Vaughn's well-being, the walking on eggshells to avoid triggering his anger, the guilt about not doing enough or giving enough, all of that has lifted. I sleep well now, without worrying about late-night phone calls or unexpected visits. I make plans without wondering if they'll be disrupted by his latest emergency. The freedom is intoxicating. Last month, I took a cruise to Alaska, something I had always wanted to do but never felt I could afford while supporting Vaughn's various needs. The trip was magnificent: glaciers calving into the sea, whales breaching in the distance, and a sense of adventure I hadn't felt since I was young. I made friends on the ship, including a retired teacher named David who lives 3 hours away. We've been corresponding since the cruise ended, and he's planning to visit next month. The possibility of romance at my age feels both thrilling and terrifying, but I'm learning to embrace uncertainty rather than fear it. My financial advisor, Dr. Harrison, reviews my accounts quarterly and consistently reassures me that my money will last far longer than I will, even with my more generous lifestyle. "You were so cautious for so many years," he said during our last meeting. "It's wonderful to see you actually enjoying your resources." The charitable giving that had originally sparked Vaughn's desperation has become one of my greatest sources of satisfaction. I contribute regularly to several organizations, including the Elder Financial Protection Center and a scholarship fund for single mothers returning to college. Seeing my money make a positive difference in other people's lives feels far more meaningful than accumulating wealth for its own sake. Sometimes I wonder what would have happened if I hadn't switched those wine glasses that night. Would Vaughn have gone through with his plan to forge my signature? Would he have escalated to more dangerous measures if the sedative approach had failed? The questions haunt me occasionally, but I try not to dwell on alternative histories. What matters is that I recognized the danger and took action to protect myself. I learned that love doesn't require martyrdom, that family loyalty shouldn't mean accepting abuse, and that it's never too late to change the trajectory of your life. My phone rings as I'm finishing my morning coffee, and I see Vaughn's name on the display. It's not his usual calling day, but I answer without the anxiety that once accompanied his unexpected calls. "Hi, Mom. I hope I'm not interrupting anything." "Not at all. How are you?" "Good. Actually, really good. I got promoted at work. It comes with a raise and better benefits." The pride in his voice is unmistakable, and I feel a corresponding warmth in my chest. "That's wonderful, Vaughn. I'm so proud of you. I wanted to tell you first, and to say thank you." "For what?" "For not giving up on me completely. For making me face the consequences of what I did instead of just cutting me off entirely. I hated you for it at the time, but I understand now that it was exactly what I needed." We talk for a few more minutes about his job and his continued progress in therapy. Before we hang up, he says something that surprises me. "I hope someday I can be half as strong as you are." After the call ends, I sit quietly, processing his words. Strong. It's not how I used to think of myself. For so many years, I felt weak, vulnerable, at the mercy of circumstances and other people's needs. But I survived my husband's sudden death, raised a son alone, rebuilt my life after betrayal, and created a new existence based on my own values and desires. Maybe Vaughn is right. Maybe I am stronger than I knew. The morning sun has climbed higher, painting the harbor in shades of gold and blue. Somewhere out there, sailboats are preparing for adventure, their crews checking lines and adjusting sails for journeys to unknown destinations. At 65, I'm finally ready for my own adventures, carrying nothing but the wisdom earned through struggle and the freedom that comes from choosing yourself, even when it's the hardest choice you'll ever make. Now I'm curious about you who listened to my story. What would you do if you were in my place? Have you ever been through something similar? Comment below. And meanwhile, I'm leaving on the final screen 2 other stories that are channel favorites, and they will definitely surprise you. Thank you for watching until here.